Whilst everyone else has been panicking over FPL chip strategies this season, I have solved everything, and all it took was 3 full days of my life wasted on a make-believe football game. The things we do for love. Welcome to FPL Mate. My name is Dan, and yeah, I've spent a lot of time figuring out all of the best chip strategies, no matter what chips you have available, all of the fixtures and double and blank game weeks that are going to be coming up for the rest of this season, and I think you are gonna not want to miss this one. So yeah guys, sorry for lack of uploads for the past few days, but genuinely all of my focus and brain power has been on this video recently, and it's been really tough to make, genuinely. But hopefully guys, this is going to be so helpful for a lot of people who are in a bit of trouble at the moment, because a lot of things have changed. And if you do appreciate this content, please do help me out by leaving a like. It really does help out so much. Do share the video as well if you want to help me out a little bit more, or keep the video a secret if you want to take the advantage of these tips yourself and no one else will have access to them. But let's get going guys, because this week we're going to talk about the best weeks to use the remaining chips, which specific teams will have double game weeks and blank game weeks, and obviously with Newcastle in particular is pretty interesting. We've actually also got a new double game week in game week 32 that could happen, and a brand new chip strategy that is so strong it may change your plans entirely. It really is that good, so I'm going to share that with you guys as well. This video is also going to be divided into chapters, though I do recommend you watch the full thing, as we will be referring back to previous sections in the video as we go through and build on our knowledge throughout. So in this video, we're going to try and paint the fixture landscape first of all, so you guys can feel confident with your chip strategy and transfer planning as well. So let's start off with a quick recap before we go into any more detail of where things have changed a little bit. So game week 29 is still a guaranteed blank for Aston Villa, Crystal Palace, Liverpool and Newcastle. None of these teams will play during this week. Game week 32 is still a guaranteed double for Newcastle and Crystal Palace. However, there is a possibility for another 2 teams to double here, which I will explain shortly. Game week 33 will still probably be the biggest double game week of the season, with a minimum of 4 teams playing twice and a maximum of 8, though currently 6 teams looks like the most likely. So real note here, game week 33 seems to have shrunk a little bit. Previously we thought that it looked like there might be 8 double game weeks here, but now we're looking more like 6. So it's still probably the best week for a bench boost in isolation, but I think it's not as essential to bench boost in game week 33 as it perhaps previously was. Game week 34 hasn't changed. It's still going to be the biggest blank game week of the season. We will see 6 to 8 teams blanking in game week 34 with no fixtures, and I have it around 75% chance of 6 blanking teams in this week and a 25% chance of 8 blanking teams in this week. So it's going to be one or the other, but you know, more likely, far more likely really, that there's going to be 6 blanking teams here. Game week 36 and game week 37 are a little trickier. We know any team that reaches the FA Cup final and their game week 37 opponents will have their fixtures moved from the weekend, but these fixtures could just as easily be moved forward to the midweek slot of game week 37, changing nothing as far as FPL is concerned, or moved back into the midweek of game week 36, creating a blank for these teams in game week 37 and a double for these teams in 36. So these kind of 2 game weeks, 36 and 37, most likely are going to come as a pair. And we are going to talk about exactly which teams are going to be blanking and doubling in the game weeks we just mentioned, of course. And there's also a small possibility for some of the fixtures to be moved from game week 34 to game week 35, game week 36, to create some additional doubles. Although, I want to put this one out here, it doesn't make too much logical sense to move more fixtures there. However, the Premier League have been kind of unpredictable with the scheduling at times this season, and seem weirdly willing to schedule games at the same time as Champions League games. And you could say, oh, surely they're not gonna, you know, clash Premier League games at the same time as the Champions League semi-finals. Like, these are huge games, and that's gonna be awful for the viewing figures. But then we said the same thing about the quarterfinals before, so who knows at this point. But regardless of cross-competition clashes, I would say generally that the Premier League's recent habit of being proactive with scheduling scheduling means that a Game Week 35 double is pretty unlikely, but still technically possible. The foundations of the doubles and blanks will still be between Game Week 32 and 34, no matter what, even if we do get a curveball or two. But with all that said, let's start looking at specifically which teams will double and which teams will blank before rounding up with some chip strategy. So let's get stuck in with the fixtures. This is what the official Premier League fixture list looks like right now, but it will change. Do not get used to this site, guys, believe me. I'm going to modify it to reflect what are the most likely changes and based on kind of current information and some predictions here as well. And it will come down a lot down to the FA Cup. Remember, the teams who reach the FA Cup semi-finals and their scheduled Game Week 34 opponents will be unavailable to play in Game Week 34 due to a clash in fixture scheduling. So, who will those teams be? Let's first check out the FA Cup quarter-final fixtures to see which teams are most likely to progress to the semi-finals. We have Bournemouth at 32% versus Man City at 68%. Brighton are sitting at 64%, being the home team against Nottingham Forest 36% in their quarter-final tie. Fulham are at 49% and Crystal Palace at 41% in that fixture. So that's a little bit tighter, much more difficult to call. We can't really predict either of those teams with certainty, so that's going to be a little bit of a coin toss there. And of course, in this final fixture, Preston North End have a 14% chance of progressing, which would be a bad news for double game weeks, but I guess good news for blank game weeks, with 86% chance of Aston Villa progressing in this fixture. So, you know, Aston Villa look like the most locked on team to progress into the semi-finals, and that really helps us with our predictions. But we can go further than this, because interestingly, Man City and Aston Villa are due to play against each other in Game Week 34. So if they both qualify to the semi-finals, this would mean one less fixture would move from Game Week 34 and into Game Week 33, since it's the FA Cup semi-finalists and their opponents who will be doubling and blanking, and they are each other's opponents. So, you know, that's one less fixture there that we could potentially have. If Preston North End beat Aston Villa, that would also mean one less blank and double game week in Game Week 34 and Game Week 33. So basically, unless Bournemouth beat Man City, we will only see 6 teams blanking in Game Week 34, and therefore only 6 teams doubling in Game Week 33. Now that is the more likely scenario than getting to the full 8 teams, meaning that, you know, we're going to have less, like I say, we're going to have less doubles and blanks than previously expected, because we think probably more likely Man City will beat Bournemouth in the FA Cup quarter-finals. And if that was the case, you know, like I said, we're going to see less. We're going to see less. So let's look at those Game Week 34 fixtures with the predictions. And given that Man City and Aston Villa play against each other, their probabilities of having their Game Week 34 fixture moved is actually compounded, with the chance of this fixture being moved going all the way up to 96%. So yeah, 96% chance of a blank game week for these two teams in Game Week 34. And of course, that double in 33 as well. You can see all of the other percentage chances of the teams blanking in Game Week 34 here too. Brighton and West Ham are the next most likely teams to have their fixtures moved. Fulham and Southampton above 50% as well. But what we now know for sure is that Chelsea, Everton, Liverpool, Spurs, Newcastle, Ipswich, Wolves, and Leicester are all guaranteed to play in Game Week 34. None of these teams will blank in Game Week 34. They're all locked on for those fixtures. So this is what the fixture table looks like now with those updates based on those stipulations. And yeah, it looks pretty interesting. So obviously, we have Aston Villa, Man City, that 96% chance of a blank in Game Week 34 and a double in 33. We can pretty much lock that in at this point. We probably, you know, playing the game of FPL, we just make that assumption that these two teams will have a blank in 34, will have a double in 33. I think, you know, it's pretty sensible at those kind of percentages. After that, well, we probably should note that Aston Villa, they're going to play Newcastle and Man City in 33 if they double there. And Man City will play Everton and Aston Villa in 33. So that's pretty nice. I would say that's pretty nice. We've got Arsenal, Brighton, Crystal Palace, Fulham, Southampton and West Ham. Also with that strong possibility of blanking in Game Week 34 and doubling in 33. They're all somewhere around 50-50, maybe between 40% and 60%. And finally, we have Bournemouth, Brentford, Man United and Nottingham Forest, who have a smaller chance of blanking in 34 and doubling in 33. The one minor caveat to this is the Nottingham Forest versus Brentford game, because Nottingham Forest are scheduled to play on the Monday in Game Week 33. So it makes a midweek fixture in Game Week 33 a little bit more difficult there. I can see the Nottingham Forest versus Brentford game possibly moving from Game Week 34 back into Game Week 32, particularly if they can maybe put a provisional date in there, or maybe if Game Week 35, if Nottingham Forest do beat Brighton, of course, to reach the FA Cup semi-finals, because neither team, Forest or Brentford, neither team are in Europe, so they can go into that slot pretty easily. Or, you know, we could simply move it from the Game Week 34 weekend to the Game Week 34 midweek, which would mean no doubles or blanks for either of those teams, despite them progressing it to the FA Cup semi-finals. Yeah, we're getting complicated. We're getting messy right now, but, you know, I just want to put it out there, all of the different possibilities that we have, but let's try and work on the most likely outcomes here, I would say, and that actually doesn't involve Forest or Brentford even doubling, really. So yeah, if it were to move to Game Week 32, this fixture, I would hope that we would get a provisional announcement soon on Forest and Brentford, so no, nobody's going to get caught off guard there, but we will know for sure who blanks in Game Week 34 by the Game Week 30 deadline. But what we might not know is when exactly all the doubles are, because we'll have the information of, you know, which teams are out of the FA Cup, still in the FA Cup, but the fixture announcement from the Premier League of where the fixtures are all going to move to might not be quite out yet by the Game Week 30 deadline. So maybe we could see an announcement after the 30 deadline, before 31. There's a few extra days there, possibly. Worst case scenario, we get the official announcement by the Game Week 32 deadline, but I don't think it'll be quite that late. So just to, you know, put that out there, Game Week 30 as a wildcard week could still work, but prepare for the possibility of a Game Week 31 wildcard if you want to use the chip with the maximum amount of information available as possible. Now, Game Week 33 here should have 4 to 8 double Game Week fixtures in total, with Aston Villa and Man City being one of them. 6 doubles is the most likely outcome, and Game Week 32 and 35 have a very small chance of another fixture to be added to them, along with that guaranteed Newcastle versus Crystal Palace double in 32. Blank Game Week 34 will be most likely 6 blanks, but there is a 25% chance of 8 blanks there. And there's actually a small chance that we have 4 blanks here as well, as we mentioned with the Forest and Brentford scenario. But let's continue on. We can start to narrow down that potential Game Week 37 and subsequent double 36 by looking at the odds of teams progressing to the final. Now, I don't actually have the odds for teams reaching the final of the FA Cup yet, but what we do have is the odds of the teams winning the entire competition. And from that, we can extrapolate which teams are most likely to progress and reach the final, because it's all tied together there. So the odds you see on screen are not the odds of the teams reaching the finals, but the odds of the teams winning the whole competition, just for clarity. A team only needs to reach the final for their fixtures to be moved from the weekend of Game Week 37 due to the clash, meaning any team that reaches the FA Cup final and their Game Week 37 opponent will have their fixture moved. Man City and Bournemouth are the only teams left in the tournament who also face each other in Game Week 37. That means if either team reach the FA Cup final, their fixture will be moved from the Game Week 37 weekend slot to either the Game Week 37 midweek slot or back into Game Week 36. And of course, if both of these teams reach the final, that will mean only one fixture is moved instead of 2 fixtures. There you go. Pretty simple stuff. So therefore, since only one of the 2 teams of the, you know, Man City versus Bournemouth need to reach the final, it's actually pretty likely that Man City and Bournemouth will have their fixture moved, because there's a really good chance one of them will reach the final. We just don't know for sure if that means blanks or doubles yet, but be aware, if there is going to be a double or a blank around the 36-37 area, it's most likely going to involve Man City and Bournemouth. All of the other teams are quite tight. That's kind of hard to... It's kind of hard to pick out really any team who we really think will reach the final, other than maybe Aston Villa, who play Spurs in Game Week 37, by the way. So that leaves us with something a little more vague for Game Week 36 and Game Week 37. Outside of Bournemouth and Man City, no teams are significantly more likely to reach the final than others, especially when we factor in that even if they do, even if we know who's going to reach the final, there's still no guarantee that the Game Week 37 fixture would even be moved into Game Week 36. We will hopefully have this information by the Game Week 35 deadline, so it's going to be pretty last minute finding out this kind of stuff. So between 0 and 4 teams will double in 36, and between 0 and 4 teams will blank in 37. Though it's probably not worth putting too much importance on this period of fixtures because there's just too much uncertainty there, particularly when we compare it to Game Week 32 to Game Week 34, which feels a lot clearer, and it's getting clearer and clearer as weeks go on. I know it probably doesn't seem like it's getting clearer, but it really, really is. But anyway, this is what the calendar looks like now in terms of the most likely outcome for me. Game Week 33 is looking a little weaker for a bench boost. Game Week 34 is looking a little less daunting. A Newcastle double-double is now out of the question, and even a Crystal Palace double-double is only about 41% likely now. All of this information means we might need to tweak our strategies a little bit. And for me, there's one strategy that I think personally I will swap to that may work for you too. If you want to take a screenshot of this table, this fixture calendar for future reference, that's totally cool with me. Just let me do a quick pose first. Let's point to the table. There you go. Take a screenshot. Yeah, beautiful stuff. I know these kind of screenshots make their way into FPL group chats around the world, so I've got to make sure I look my best. But let's move on to these chip strategies. So I want to first of all talk about which weeks are best for each chip before doing the strategies, and we will go over this pretty quickly, but things have kind of changed a little bit here. So I like to divide the chips into 2 categories, and we call the first category here the power chips, which are all about maximizing your points on individual game weeks. The bench boost, triple captain, and assistant manager chips all fall into this category. And then we have the planning chips, the wildcard and free hit, which are just as much about maximizing your points around them than they are about maximizing your points in the individual week in which you play them. The planning chips form the foundation of your wider strategy, and the power chips are more about, finding those right moments and going crazy with the points in those individual weeks. So let's start off with those crazy moments that we might be able to find. So the bench boost sadly feels like the weakest it's been in several years due to how the fixtures have really been laid out. Therefore, even though Game Week 33 still technically looks like the best week to play it, you may actually get a greater benefit from using a different chip during this kind of period. Ideally, we want to play this chip in a double game week, so Game Week 32 and 36 are also possibilities, but I'm just not totally against, just splurging your bench boost chip on a random week where your bench just looks pretty strong on that individual week. Certainly this chip has dropped down the pecking order on which chip should be prioritized for the biggest double game weeks, and if you've somehow already used this chip, I think you've seriously got away with this one in a way this year, but maybe next year you might want to be a bit more patient because you never know what might happen in FPL. The assistant manager chip is really strong still if you still have it. It's probably your priority chip now, to be honest. Game Week 31 looks like the best week to play it. That way, within the 3 game week period in which the assistant manager is activated, you get Game Week 31, 32 and 33, so you're going to get 2 double game weeks within that. Newcastle or Crystal Palace would be the managers of choice in Game Week 32. Of course, you can use a transfer to switch your manager to your favorite doubler in 33, and then you can figure out who you like for Game Week 31 separately. But if you're looking for table bonus, Crystal Palace could be really good for all 3 weeks, really, particularly if they do end up getting a double in Game Week 33 as well as 32, of course. You could also use your assistant manager in Game Week 32 just to keep that delayed wild card Game Week 31 option open, but it makes things more difficult if you also want to use a different chip, such as your free hit in blank Game Week 34. A Game Week 31 or 32 assistant manager would probably push your bench boost or triple captain chips to Game Week 36. Alternatively, you could play your assistant manager in Game Week 30 if you are not wildcarding during that period, which would open up Game Week 33 for your bench boost. Game Week 29 free hitters, this would probably be a really nice play for you, so you could take advantage of both the assistant manager and the bench boost in those strong double game weeks. Because remember, Game Week 36 is not a guaranteed double game week at all. Finally, you could use your assistant manager for the final game weeks of 36, 37, and 38, though that does feel suboptimal compared to the other options, and would probably try and avoid this option unless absolutely necessary. The triple captain chip should be played in game week 33 if you have no other power chips available, but you probably do. If you have your bench boost as well as your triple captain, you could play one in game week 32 and the other in game week 33, depending on what those finalized fixtures look like. If you have your assistant manager but no bench boost, but you do have your triple captain, you can use that triple captain either now on Salah against Southampton in game week 28 to get that guaranteed nice single game week, or you can wait until game week 36 and hope for a double there. And if you have all of your power chips, I would probably go ahead and play the triple captain right away in game week 28, save your assistant manager for either game week 31 or game week 32, and finally use your bench boost in game week 36. And with all of that said, I think we can start putting together some full chip strategies and try and figure out which of these works best for you. And guys, just wait for strategy 4. It's so good. Right, this is Chip Strategy 1. You may have recognized it if you have watched these chip strategy videos before, but things have changed a little bit, and it's actually starting to look a little bit weaker as a strategy, and I will explain why. So hopefully you've already begun to remove those Liverpool, Aston Villa, Newcastle, Crystal Palace players if you are looking to play this strategy who do blank in game week 29, or you've saved transfers in order to do it. So if you haven't done any of that, if you've got a load of these players, this strategy is probably not for you. Game week 30 is when you get a wild card. You know who's going to double in game week 33 by maybe game week 31. That way you can maximize your doublers in game week 32 and 33. If you don't have your assistant manager chip, you can delay that wild card to game week 31 to get that extra information. Game week 31, if you have it, play your assistant manager. But if not, game week 32 is going to be a triple captain week. If you have that, game week 33 is going to be the bench boost week for that biggest double of the season. If you have your assistant manager and one of the other power chips, play the other one in game week 36. If you have if you have a bench boost, I guess that goes in 36, triple captain in 28 if you have all of your chips. Game week 34, free hit out all of those players who blank in game week 34, because you know this, a lot of the tier players who just doubled will now blank in those two back-to-back game weeks. And game week 35 to 36, hopefully you should also be prepared for the double in 36 as well, because of the wild card that you set up previously. So save your transfers for game week 37, because you might want to move players out if there is a blank there. Game week 36, if you use your assistant manager in the game week 31 to 34 period, this is where you're going to look to use your triple captain, bench boost. And game week 37, use any spare transfers to remove blank game week players, so you can try and play with 11 men. The advantages to this strategy is that it maximizes points on your doubles, 32, 33, and 36. It easily deals with the biggest blank of the season in game week 34, and it prioritizes certain blank double game information. So all of the certainties, we are prioritizing that, and we are placing less emphasis on game week 36 and 37, where there is more mystery, but at least having the game week 36 and 37 a little bit covered. We still have it a little bit covered. We're not totally ignoring it, but we are prioritizing that, the certainty, the certain information. The disadvantages, and this is where things get interesting. So of course, we mentioned if you've got a lot of blanking players in 29, this is going to be difficult to execute, but this is where things start to look worse, particularly when we look at the kind of fixtures we're likely to get now in, you know, double 34, blank 35. So if you're forced to wildcard early, you know, and you have your assistant manager, maybe this strategy isn't going to be great, because you're going to be wildcarding in 30. You might not have all the information when you play your assistant manager the following week. You might actually find that some of the teams you thought would double in certain places, things might go a little bit wrong there. So game week 30 to 34 in this strategy is super crowded. It's super packed. So if you have a lot of chips, this might be difficult. It might be difficult to execute. But here's the kicker. Your wildcard team in this strategy may actually be weaker in the long term, because think about the kind of teams that the players, you know, from the teams you're going to be wildcarding in. You're going to be wildcarding in Man City, Aston Villa. Sounds fine so far, but then it's going to be like a lot of Fulham, West Ham, you know, not really too much Liverpool, Newcastle, probably not Arsenal. There's a lot of teams that are really strong Premier League teams that you're not going to have too much coverage from. So your team could be actually weaker for the long term. And I think that's really putting me off this strategy, because the core of your team from that wild card actually may suffer after we get out of the blanky, doubly kind of area. And like I said, we have got a solution for that, which I'm going to talk about later. But there are still some other strategies that are totally viable. Strategy 2, the patient strategy. Game week 28 to 29. Remove those players who blank in game week 29. You could play with 10 men in game week 29 as well if you wanted to. That would allow you to keep more Newcastle and Crystal Palace players ready for double game week 32. Game week 30, you're going to use your assistant manager, or in game week 32, you're going to play triple captain. Game week 33, bench boost. Game week 34, wildcard out all of those players who blank. Bring in the players who are out of the FA Cup. Liverpool, Chelsea, Newcastle, and many more. Game week 36, you're going to free hit if there's a double game week there. If there's not a double game week there, you are maybe in some trouble. And then in blank game week 37, your team should be mostly fine due to the wildcard in game week 34. You're going to have removed players who blank in game week 34. It'll be a lot of the same teams will also, who don't blank in 34 will be the same players from teams who don't blank in 37, if that makes sense. It's going to be a lot of the same players there. So you'd be totally fine. Advantages of this one: it prepares you for the potential game week 36 and 37 doubles and blanks. It improves your points potential for your free hit, because you're playing a more aggressive free hit in a double game week rather than in a blank game week. And it works well if you feel comfortable tackling game week 29 without chips and you still have your assistant manager. If you've got a lot of chips to use, yeah, but you're happy to be patient, hey, this could kind of work. The disadvantages: game week 29 could be difficult to deal with. It doesn't really have an obvious place for a bench boost and an assistant manager. So if you have both of these chips, one of them is going to be weakened. It is also speculative, and it does fall apart as a strategy if there are no doubles and blanks in 36 and 37. But it is also super flexible. So, by being patient, saving your chips, you are allowing yourself to be open to freak scenarios that none of us saw coming. So that could be a good little advantage there as well. Strategy 3, the impatient strategy. Because the double game week 33 and game week 34 may have shrunk a little bit, this strategy has actually gotten a little bit stronger, particularly if you already planned it. Because actually, game week 29 could be as damaging as a blank game week as game week 34, potentially. Really. So when you're going to use your chips, game week 29 is a free hit to remove those blanking players temporarily, and obviously you're going to keep all those Crystal Palace and Newcastle players ready to go again from game week 30 into game week 32, where they have their double. In game week 30/31, use your assistant manager or a triple captain in 32. 33, bench boost, as long as you don't play the assistant manager in 31, I guess. Game week 34, wildcard. Game week 35-37, pray there are no doubles and blanks, and if there are, just do your best with your transfers, because you won't even have this information at the point where you wildcard in game week 34. Triple captain can go into game week 36 if you do have your assistant manager as well. And the advantages is that game week 29 is completely covered. So even if you didn't plan for game week 29, no problem, you're sorted. You can also maximize the potential on your assistant manager chip using this strategy. This is probably the best strategy to easily use your assistant manager chip, I would say, particularly if you have a lot of chips. I think this works well. If there are no doubles and blanks at the end of the season, you will also have a really strong team to finish the season, which is going to be nice. You've got to count on there being no doubles and blanks though. The disadvantages are a late wildcard does make it a little harder to maximize your team for game week 32 and game week 33. If game week 36 and 37 turn into doubles and blanks, there could be some trouble. And if anything else unexpected happens, you will be super restricted and won't easily be able to change your strategy either. So this is really quite a rigid strategy. You're committing very, very early, which means, those unexpected moments probably cause this strategy the most problems of all of the possible strategies. But here it is, guys. This is the moment we talk about my favorite strategy in FPL right now that just works. And this is the reverse strategy. Now, I did say it works. It works for me. It's going to work for a lot of you guys, but I don't think it's going to work for everyone. So those other strategies are still super relevant. But This new strategy is basically strategy 1, but in reverse, hence the naming. And right now, this is the strategy I'm most likely to use in FPL this season. Now, this strategy looks really strong now that Newcastle will double in 32, but have no other doubles or blanks this season. And it also could get even stronger if Crystal Palace do not reach the FA Cup semi-finals, as we predict right now. So, when do you use your chips? Well, remove those Liverpool, Aston Villa, Newcastle and Crystal Palace players who blank in Game Week 29 and try and get to 11 playing players. Game Week 30, 31 or 32, technically, when you know who will blank in Game Week 34, you can go ahead and hit the wildcard and grab as many players as possible in your wildcard team who do not blank in Game Week 34. So, you know, you're going triple Newcastle, Crystal Palace, if they don't blank in 34, you go triple Crystal Palace as well. Then you add Liverpool, maybe Chelsea, Arsenal, if they play in Game Week 34. You grab all of these great players from great teams who double in 32 and do not blank in 34. And there's a lot of good options to pick from there. After that, in, you know, Game Week 33, this is your free hit week. Yes, Game Week 33 is your free hit week. And by the way, if you've got a bench boost, you probably throw that in Game Week 32 in this strategy. That's where the bench boost would go in this one. So that would mean a wildcard 31, bench boost 32. It's still a double game week, so you're going to get some benefit off the bench boost, but perhaps not as much as you would in 33. But this works better for the longer term, right? But anyway, I'm getting ahead of myself a little bit here. So Game Week 33. This is where it gets really fun. Game Week 33, you're going to play your free hit in this week. So we're playing the free hit in the biggest double game week of the season, which is not something we thought would be a real option previously, but now I really think it is. Because a lot of the teams who are likely to double in Game Week 33 are teams, you know, Aston Villa and Man City are fine. We've got like Brighton, West Ham, Fulham. These are the most likely teams to double. And I think you guys are probably not going to want to have too many of these players for the long term. Maybe you want triple City is fine, but Aston Villa, 1 or 2 players is probably the max you'd want to hold for the long term. And, you know, these other teams, Brighton, West Ham, Fulham, you're not going to want to overload on these players as players who are in the core of your team for the remainder of the season. You're not going to want that. The free hit solves that. You get them all in for one game week only, and they're going to be good for their doubles, and then they're gone the next week. Game week 34, because of your wild card prioritizing players who play in game week 34, you can have a strong game week 34 squad here. So it's fully covered for the blank because of the way you set that up. And if it turns out game week 36 is a double, you're not going to be fully prepared for this one. I can't lie to you. This strategy, this is probably the biggest weakness of this strategy, is that if game week 36 is a double, you know, you're probably going to have to make sure you've saved a couple of transfers to bring in, you know, whoever does end up doubling in 36 if it does happen. But you're basically hoping with this strategy that there's either no doubles in 36, no blanks in 37, although 37 you should be fine regardless. But in game week 36, if there is just two teams doubling, I think that would be fine. If there's 4 teams doubling in that week, could get a little techier. But Game week 37, like we mentioned, you will be covered for that one. And interestingly, on game week 36, if you've got a lot of chips available, you could play your assistant manager here. You could play a triple captain in here as well if you have them all. But like I say, game week 37, you will be covered because of the way you set your wild card up. Now, the advantages of this strategy is it maximizes your free hit points, and it really does, without having to commit to these doubling teams long term. It covers all of the blank game weeks as long as you have already prepared for game week 29, and it ensures you have a strong base squad for the long term, rather than being stuck with double game week 33 players that you might not actually want long term. The disadvantages are it's difficult to execute if you haven't prepared for game week 29. This strategy also isn't great if you have a lot of those power chips, right? If you have your assistant manager, then you're going to be forced to use it in game week 36, which is not optimal. Triple captain doesn't matter as much, that's fine, but if you have all of your chips, this probably isn't the strategy for you because there's not too much room for an assistant manager. So I think those are probably the people who are going to be, you know, unable to use this strategy. People who still have their assistant manager and people who are just completely unprepared for blank game week 29. Those are the 2 categories of people who will struggle with this strategy. Everyone else, I think it does work for. And there's also a good chance that you will be under-optimized for Game Week 36 if there's a double there. Of course, we mentioned that. But one more thing on this strategy before we go on to some of those bonus strategies, I guess, for those who lack wildcards and free hits. On that very note, this strategy, I think, genuinely could work. Not as easily, but could still work if you've already used your wildcard, your second wildcard this season. If you already used your second wildcard, just remove the wildcard from this strategy, and it would make your bench boost pretty weak, most likely. But everything else could actually end up working out quite well, because you're not going to have many Man City players in your team right now, most likely. You might have one or two. You might be thinking about getting more, but most people are not going to have many. You're not going to have many, Aston Villa players in your team. You're going to be removing those players because of the blank Game Week 29. So in many ways, you're going to have a lot of the players who play in Game Week 34 have those guaranteed fixtures in Game Week 34 anyway. Newcastle, Liverpool, Arsenal pretty likely. We spoke about some other teams as well. You can go back and check the calendar if you want to see the odds again. So yeah, without a wild card, this still works. So yeah, man, honestly, I genuinely, I'm really, really proud of this strategy. It took me a long time to sit down and look through all of the different moving parts, who it will work for, who it wouldn't. So yeah, hopefully you really like this one. And like I say, if you do, please do drop a like, please do subscribe or whatever. It's super, super helpful for the channel. And, it really, it makes me feel good that this has been a reward for my work, I suppose. But whatever, let's look at these other strategies. So if you've got no wildcard and you don't fancy trying the no wildcard reverse strategy, wow, we're getting complicated now with those names. Start preparing for blank Game Week 29, but honestly, it might be worth just playing with 9 or 10 men so you have more players ready for the Dublin 32, keeping those Crystal Palace and Newcastle players, and of course more non-blanking players for Game Week 34, such as Liverpool and Newcastle players. But Game Week 30, assistant manager, if you have a bench boost 30, use that in Game Week 32. If no bench boost, or you're happy to save it for later, you can instead use your assistant manager in 31. Game Week 33 free hit, Game Week 36 bench boost, as we mentioned, or triple captain, or maybe triple captain in Game Week 28 if you want to be safe. If you have no free hit, start preparing for blank Game Week 29 right now. Again, playing with 9 or 10 men is totally fine. Game Week 30, 31, use the assistant manager, 33 bench boost, 34 wild card, and Game Week 28 or 36 triple captain. If you don't have a wild card or a free hit, first of all, why did you use them? But yeah, as always, if you have no wild card or free hit, good luck. However, I should say that for those who have already used both their wildcard and the free hit, or even just one of those two chips, things are actually falling quite nicely for you. So even though it's a little frustrating for like super planners like me who try to stay way ahead of the game, actually, if you went early, if you were impatient with your chips, it's not such a bad season for you. Genuinely, like, you could do well. We've got to be real with ourselves. You could do good. You could still do good. You could still do really, really good. So, yeah, good luck. You don't need it as much as you perhaps did before. So, as we wrap up the video, guys, if you have any other chip strategies that maybe I haven't thought of, please do let me know. If you've got any other ideas, I'll of course, let you guys know what I think of them in the comments section. If you've got any questions around anything we spoke about today, I know there was a lot. I know a lot of it was kind of complicated stuff as well. So, totally respect if there's any questions. I'll do my best to answer them for you. And that's just about it. I really hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, do drop a like, do subscribe if you're new around here, and finally I can get back to usual FPL content for the rest of the week. See you later, mates. Bye bye.